Why is history important? History teaches you lessons. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran repeatedly gives us histories of the previous nations. The purpose of repeating the stories of Banu Israel and the people of Dawood and people of Sulaiman and people of Nuh and people of other prophets for that matter is to teach you lessons. These stories are told for a reason, and the reason is to get people to contemplate, to ponder upon the errors and the mistakes of the previous nations so that we don't repeat them. And also at the same time, we repeat what they did right. If they did something right, we must repeat it. All their virtuous acts, all their good deeds, all the achievements that were positive, we must repeat them. That's why history is a very powerful argument from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we must learn from the errors and the virtues of the past nations. This is why knowing your history as Muslims in particular and as humans in general is absolutely crucial. You cannot ignore history. A people who forget their history are condemned to relive it. If you don't learn from your history, if you don't take lessons from what happened before you, you will fall victim to same problems, same diseases, same errors, same social destructions that occurred in the past. So to avoid the disasters and the catastrophes and the mistakes and the errors of the past, you must study history very, very carefully. Otherwise they will repeat. They keep repeating themselves. This is why repetition or reminders
Assalamu alaikum listeners, welcome back to another episode of Boys in the Cave. I'm your co-host Tanzim. I'm joined by my another co-host Rafael. Alhamdulillah, we're joined by a very, very special guest, Ustad Adnan Rashid. So Ustad Adnan is a historian with a specialty in the history of Islamic civilization, comparative religion and Hadith literature, and he has an honours degree in history from the University of London. I think you graduated recently, Ustad?
That's correct. That's correct. Yes.
Alhamdulillah, mashallah. And you're also, I think, continuing further studies from memory. I watched your recent video. You said that you're looking to do a PhD soon. Is that correct?
Inshallah.
And what's that looking to specialize in?
Indian history. Islam in India during the Mughal period. Inshallah.
Because we actually watched your recent. I watched your recent episode with Dili Hussain, who we've had on twice on our podcast. Alhamdulillah, it's very insightful in general about Mughal history. So, you're also the head of Hittin Institute as well as senior researcher and lecturer. So, assalamu alaikum, Ustad, and welcome to Boys in the Cave.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much for having me, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity.
As are we for having you on. I think one of the main things I really wanted to probably ask you about, because I used to watch your videos now. I've been watching your videos now for almost half a decade.
By the way, just some context, Ustad, Rafael is a revert Italian brother.
I was probably going to get there, yeah. So
just to give
my family background is mostly Mediterranean and Italian. I was born into a non-Muslim family. Obviously started to come across Islam in my teens, and obviously nowadays with the internet and with sort of the YouTube and social media, Islam has quite a big presence on there, and I think really we punch above our weight in a lot of discussions about philosophy, comparative religion in these Western countries where we may not have great populations, but we certainly have a lot of contribution. And I've been watching your videos and the videos of a lot of the other pioneers in the Dawah scene, particularly in the UK, which was one that was, to me, probably the most interesting, engaging and exciting. I used to watch a lot of Hamza Dorsis, for example. And I'm aware of the fact that you've been active in Dawah probably a lot longer than many of these brothers who are quite popular these days. And I wanted to get your insights, and this is pretty deep to start off with, but on how the internet, social media, YouTube has revolutionized and changed the Dawah scene in terms of Islamic discourse with other religions and with atheism and secularism, and the accessibility to these discussions now through YouTube and other platforms. How has this really changed Dawah, and how much has it changed since you became active?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for that question. I believe social media has changed the dynamics of Dawah globally. Dawah was previously not widely disseminated due to the limitations we had in terms of media technology. If you remember, I don't know if you are old enough to remember, but in the 90s, people used to watch Dawah videos on these VHS tapes. There were big VCRs, and people would
Subhanallah.
simply, I mean, I am one of those people. I used to watch Sheikh Ahmad Didat's videos through a VCR, basically, on my television set. And, that was the main medium we used to get knowledge from du'at like Sheikh Ahmad Didat and Dr. Zakir Naik and other individuals like them. By the way, Sheikh Ahmad Didat's son was shot this morning in South Africa.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
subhanallah, we've heard the news.
it is a recent event,
It's tragic.
and it's very tragic. It's very sad. Such a great man who served the country so much for so many decades. His son ended up like that. Unfortunately, South Africa is going through a very, very difficult period these days due to the high crime rate. And we pray that Sheikh Ahmad Didat's son, Sheikh Yusuf Didat, recovers soon and goes back to normality.
I mean,
It is a very sad news we received today, and we pray collectively that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him with a quick recovery. And
I mean, even just to give a context as well, I think Sheikh Ahmed Didat and his son, they were instrumental with helping people like Zakir Naik in the contemporary times, and so he's played a massive role, I guess, in contemporary dawah as well. So,
absolutely. I
inshallah.
consider myself a product of Sheikh Ahmad Didat's work. I used to watch his videos, take notes, sit down, highlight biblical verses, and then read them again and again, and go to Speaker's Corner in the mid 2000s. And then I got more active. By the year 2008, I started getting into debating with some of the people who used to attend there. And from then onwards, it has been, just getting busier and busier by the day. So dynamics have changed. Now da'wah is a global thing due to the good use of social media, because social media is like a two-edged sword. You can use it for bad things. People are, spreading a lot of falsehood, a lot of satanic stuff. People are using it for spreading munkar all around the world. At the same time, the awliya of Ar-Rahman, the friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, are also using it to spread goodness, inviting people to goodness, inviting people to sanity, inviting people to morality and all these things. And alhamdulillah, social media has changed the dynamics. In fact, people, non-Muslims now can listen to our words and watch our content on a wider scale. People like Mufti Menk are reaching out to, let's say, millions of people around the world, and a lot of his listeners are actually non-Muslims, believe it or not. He's very popular in Africa. Even African Christians listen to him, and his work is affecting a lot of people around the world. And this is purely due to social media. If we were to, if we were still limited by these VHS tapes, and if technology hadn't moved on, then people like Mufti Menk, they would be very limited. They would be limited to the Muslim community purely, people who have interest to listen to him or his Islamic content. But just because he's on Twitter, he's on Instagram, he's on YouTube, a lot more people are listening to his stuff. Likewise, there are other dawah individuals around the world, many intellectuals, many activists. They are reaching out to hundreds of thousands of people, possibly millions of people. So social media has definitely changed the dynamics of dawah in the last 5 years, if not more. And it is a good thing. It is a good thing. We must learn the art of technology, and we really need to get involved more. We need to pioneer investment, and I would say investment in learning technology, in training ourselves in these technologies, so that we can become inventors, not only using technology, but how to make it also very important, because we are relying on mainly non-Muslim sources to give us this technology. So we need to pioneer the field of media. We need to become producers. We need to become manufacturers. We need to become inventors, just like we once were during a golden age. We talk about so often. So I believe dynamics have changed.
SubhanAllah. Even just to give a quick insight, like at Boys in Cave, inshallah, we're trying to go video full time and all that. And even in that process, just trying to find you first instinct is like to go to a camera expert in the Muslim community or a video expert in the Muslim community and get their insights and stuff. But subhanAllah, we don't have enough of that. So I'm actually having to go to, non-Muslim experts as well. And there's plenty as well. You just literally search on Google. So it actually shows like as a community, we're not kind of up to the mark. I'm sure there is, I know like One Path and stuff, they're doing amazing works and they're high quality, but I'm talking to like a vast amount. There's not as much, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm sure the same with the British versions of the British Dawah outlets. I think it's Sheikh Abdul Rahim Green, who was someone who was again very influential in the sort of journey that I took from where I was in my life to becoming a Muslim. And a lot of these famous Dawah sort of institutions propagated
even with
I'm sure they have Muslim sort of videographers and stuff, but by and large, especially in minority communities, it can be sometimes a skill shortage.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a shame. It's kind of I guess inhibiting a bit of our dawah to reach millions, because I remember even I mentioned this on Subah Ahmed's episode that when I would be binge watching on Speaker's Corner and I'm going into the late, I guess around the 2000s, I'm seeing Sheikh Abdul Rahim Green on this pulpit sort of thing with this little grainy video with the camcorder, some guy recording, and
now we have full HD quality.
Yeah, subhanAllah. I think I was watching Speaker's Corner. It's a full HD live streaming now. It's subhanAllah how I guess the times have changed. Alhamdulillah. So
yeah, absolutely. Even Speaker's Corner has changed. It never used to be like that. Previously, people would hardly video these discussions and debates. And recently, I would say in the last 3 years, it has really picked up. Speaker's Corner discussions would mainly be wasted simply because no one was recording and there was no record of these discussions. But now every single discussion, good and bad discussions, are being recorded and people are choosing carefully, and by the grace of Allah, some of these discussions are reaching out to millions of people. Some of these videos have phenomenal hits, and it is like a phenomenon. People from all around the world are watching these discussions and they're taking interest in these discussions, because there is no other platform like that in the world, to my knowledge, where people get together and they discuss matters of religion, philosophy, politics, history, and other matters that are very important for people living in London, if not in Britain. And it is a model. It is a model place. It needs to be encouraged. It is very much cherished by people who attend. Of course, it's not always pleasant listening to people who, sometimes people come with a lot of ideas and you don't agree with those ideas, but such is the nature of the place. And Alhamdulillah, as far as Dawah is concerned, it has really picked up from Speaker's Corner, mashallah. A lot of youngsters around the world are now learning arguments. They are gaining confidence in Islam. They are they watch and they actually wait for the videos to come out, right? And this is one of the beautiful things about this place.
Absolutely. I think the difference I noticed between the United Kingdom and the United States, for example, which also has quite a large Muslim minority and also some very influential Muslim figures who have large followings through digital and social media. I find that, some of the great ideas propagated and the contributions of Sheikh Dr. Yasir Qadhi, for example, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Zaid Shakir, they're all Imam Zaid Shakir, they're all very influential. But the thing is about the UK was the discussion that they were able to have with other ideologies.
On a public platform as well.
Yeah, on a public platform made it unique. So there was no sort of Speaker's Corner in the United States and amongst
everyone
those
was kind of in the bubbles.
I would put it crudely. I would say Speaker's Corner is the UFC of Dawah.
Subhanallah.
It's like cage fighting. It's like you have these people who come to fight intellectually, okay, and there are no rules. There are no rules, so you can say what you like, and you can expect anything to come up, and you have to be prepared to answer. You have to be prepared to give some sort of response, and it really prepares you. It really trains you hard. Once you have been trained in speaker's corner, uh, it is very difficult to be beaten in any arena around the world when you're having a dialogue, a discussion, uh, and it's a very good place to learn arguments from all sides, from atheists, from Christians, from Muslims, from Shias, from Sunnis. Some people come and they preach their philosophy. People, there are communists there are Nazis. I mean, right wing. Sometimes you find right wing extremists there. Sometimes you have some, unfortunately, so-called Muslim extremists there as well. Okay, so in fact, they are extremists from all. So you get all sorts of people there. So it can get messy at times. It can get very messy. Things are thrown around all over the place, and you really have to endure. You have to keep your calm. You have to endure, basically.
I think something that we've spoken to Dr. Gilan about, and it's kind of stuck with me to this day, is that he mentioned, like, imagine for a Muslim, it's like if you're in the thick of things and you're thinking, why am I bombarded with all these arguments? What's the point? But then Dr. Gilan mentioned that one of the wisdoms, I guess, for atheists existing, for Christians existing, is that us as Muslims learn the deen better, because it, like, for example, you're alluding to Speaker's Corner being sort of like a UFC cage fight. So that means you have to train yourself. So when you train yourself, you have to hit the books, you have to understand the arguments, you have to understand what the scholars were saying, and then you present your case. So that's what kind of, when you're interacting with people from different faiths, that's what you're sort of encountered with.
And the thing is about nowadays is that extends to the laity, the Muslim laity.
Exactly.
It's not just the ulama and the teachers within the community who have studied traditionally and have ijazah and in universities. It's actually ordinary Muslims are going out and researching sort of tafsir of different ayat to really get to the core of the meanings of them, and having to delve into aspects of aqidah, even a handful of lay people who are sort of among the more sort of intellectual.
Yes, some of these discussions are very deep. They are very deep discussions. If you noticed in Speaker's Corner, sometimes very intricate and delicate points are raised from Muslim theology and Christian theology, and sometimes people bring out a lot of research to discuss, and we really have to dig deeper into classical works to give answer. So it can teach you at the same time a lot. It can teach you a lot.
I wanted to ask as well, you're mentioning, being involved with Speaker's Corner and Speaker's Corner in general. You've also done, debates and talks worldwide. And obviously that means that you would have encountered with Muslim youth, Muslims in general, Muslims of all spectrums, and had discussions with, Christian apologists, etc., etc. So with all those experiences combined, what would you say is the biggest issue or problem facing the Ummah at this current moment?
To sort of frame that a little bit more specifically, I mean, I think if you look in the last century, there was a lot of missionary activity, and it was the missionary activity from Christians that actually sparked Ahmad Didat's sort of introduction of the and revival of Islamic polemics. It's very interesting how that was sort of the cause, the issue that he identified with his community at the time, the sort of aggressive Christian missionaries, and how he developed a response to that in a very famous and notable, and effective way. But what would you say nowadays is the sort of buzzwords and problems affecting the Muslim youth? If we say, for example, it was aggressive Christian missionaries in the past, would you say it's new atheism today? Would you say that it's politics and the geopolitics in the Muslim world? What would your sort of identification of these major issues be?
I think one of the biggest problems we're facing today is an identity crisis. We have lost touch with our civilization, if you like. You see, we have little knowledge of our achievements of the past. We have little knowledge of our luminaries, our heroes. We know very little about what Muslim civilization is, what it stands for, what its achievements were, and how can we revive them today. If you don't know your past, you will never have a desire to repeat it if it was great, if it was virtuous. We have many things to cherish in our past, in our history, and we can only cherish them when we know about them.
Mashallah.
And once we get to know about them, we develop a sense of attachment to our civilization. We become more aware. We become more. How can I put it? Uh, I don't want to use the word proud of it, because pride is not always the right thing. But we become more. You know,
Awakened,
how can I
cognizant.
put it? Pleased. We become more pleased with our past. We are more, because we are more aware. It makes us. It makes us more. Let's use the word proud of it. But in the right sense, not being proud as in you have a sense of superiority over other civilizations. No, not. That's not what I mean. What I mean by that is that you have a sense of confidence in your past. That okay, we stand on the shoulders of giants. We have something great to look up to. We have something very, very powerful. We have a very, very great, amazing tradition, whether it's in poetry, whether it is in intellectual activity, whether it is in education, whether it is in philosophy, whether it is in literature, you name it, we have some giants in the past. How many Muslims do you know, youngsters, who are aware of Arabic poets? And some of the poetry is so deep that you will forget about Plato and Aristotle and Shakespeare and Wordsworth and all these people. You will actually forget about them. Seriously, I'm not saying these people shouldn't be studied. They should be studied. But if we're not studying our own histories and our own luminaries of the past, then how will we ever appreciate them? So this is the point I'm trying to make, that we have Arabic poets, Arabic thinkers, intellectuals, Persian. We have so much in the Persian language. Okay, we have so much in the Urdu language, for example. Okay, these are the three main Islamic languages spoken in the world, in the Muslim world. Okay, Arabic, Persian. When it comes to literature, there is a vast amount of literature in these three languages, and they have been neglected lately. And this is because of this identity crisis we are failing. We are facing around the world. So this is one of the biggest problems we are facing. This is why we do not find ways to unite on common things as Muslims, right? We are very nationalistic when it comes to our culture, our civilizations. We mainly defend our own cultures, our own civilizations, our own linguistic traditions. We are not aware of the wider achievements of the Muslim civilization from, let's say, Al-Andalus to all the way to China. Okay, so this is our civilization. We need to own it. We need to cherish it. We need to learn about it. And we need to claim it. We need to reclaim it. Okay, this belongs to us. We're not confined by few lines drawn by some colonial administrators in the 1940s or 1930s or 1960s. We're not confined by these lines. We are Muslims. We are an ummah, and we share this legacy as brothers and sisters. Okay, whatever the Muslim civilization achieved from northern China to all the way to Spain, okay, one of the largest stretches of land in human history ever governed by one group of people, okay, it is ours to claim. So I feel we really need to learn about our civilization more, and then we will appreciate it. Then we'll be exposed to, a mountain of knowledge, and then, inshallah ta'ala, things will start to get better. This is one of the reasons I believe we are seriously, we are being victimized around the world, okay, because we are not united on one idea. And that idea, I believe, is the Muslim civilization, right? And this is why a lot of the Muslims feel that they have to apologize for Islam. They have to apologize for being Muslim. You have to be apologetic to look like a Muslim, especially those Muslims who live in the West, because of recent propaganda, recent onslaught against Muslims, Islamophobia, the rise of Islamophobia in the West. Okay, whether it's Australia, whether it's Canada, whether it's the US or Western Europe, wherever you may be. Okay, we have been made to somehow feel apologetic about Islam, as if we have to really apologize. No, this is happening because we have made to believe subliminally that we are to blame for all the recent geopolitical disasters and catastrophes in the Middle East. Whatever is happening, all the terrorism, all the extremism on the part of, let's say, people like ISIS and other unfortunate recent events, they are actually a product of Western deeds in these lands. I mean, we have discussed this many times, that where did groups like ISIS emerge from? Where did they come from? Are they a product of the Muslim civilization? Are they a product of Islam? Or were they produced by the geopolitical
Circumstances.
catastrophes or geopolitical injustices in these lands? They are a reactionary movement, albeit a barbaric one, okay, albeit a very savage one, but they are a reaction to a situation created in places like Iraq, for example. Okay, Iraq invasion produced ISIS, and there are academic reference to this. I mean, in fact, even Hillary Clinton, she was using this rhetoric against Donald Trump and her opponents during the election campaign, that we created ISIS.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she was right about it. For once, I can agree with her that it is some of the Western deeds in, unfortunately, in our lands, in the Middle East, where all of this happened. So Islamic civilization are free of such extremism, such acts, or such, events. Our civilization is magnificent. It is great. We cherish our poets, our philosophers, our intellectuals, our libraries, our monuments, our architectural achievements, our calligraphy, our art, whether it is in Al-Andalus or in North Africa or in Egypt or in Syria, let's say, or in Palestine or in India, the Mughal monuments or the Delhi Sultanate period monuments, or as far as Central Asia. Okay, Islam created a hugely magnificent civilization, which unfortunately hasn't been studied to date properly. We, the Muslims, are guilty of neglecting our own civilization, our own history. We have left it to others. Not that others shouldn't be thanked. We thank all Western scholars, all Western intellectuals who have studied our civilization and highlighted some magnificent aspects.
But there are
of it.
smears
But we
as
are
well
guilty.
from these
Go ahead.
like the Orientalist scholars. I did a research paper recently about Patricia Crone and her theories about the sort of emergence of Islam in late antiquity. And honestly, like some of their contributions have literally been nothing more than just horrible smears of Islamic history. Mind you, there are some obviously notable exceptions of genuine Western scholars, but I do think that the point that you're making about Muslims need to reclaim their own history and reclaim their own identity is poignant, because if we don't, then we allow people like Douglas Murray, for example, and other sort of pseudo-intellectuals in the West to tell us about our own history and tell us about how we were violent and how we contributed nothing to human civilization as a more broad.
Yeah, even like even in the field of science, like Neil deGrasse Tyson comes out and is like, Ghazali, destroyed intellectual
But the thing is,
thinking.
he knows nothing about Ghazali in the first place. Someone probably just told him that, and he just transmitted it, because there's barely any fact to any of that. There's Patricia.
Look, this is why we need more Muslim historians,
Absolutely.
more Muslim social scientists, more Muslim anthropologists, more Muslim archaeologists, more Muslim intellectuals, poets, philosophers, thinkers. We need more. When you look at the Muslim world, what do you see? You see Muslims wanting to become engineers, lawyers, accountants. Okay, you just want to become someone with a screwdriver in your hand, just a worker, just a slave to the system. We need people to work. Don't get me wrong. We need carpenters. We need taxi drivers. We need restaurant owners. We need people who work in the underground to fix the tracks. We need all that. Okay. By the way, we have underground trains in London, so I'm referring to that. Okay, in case you're wondering what is underground. Okay, so we need all those people, but do the Muslims have to do all that? Have we taken a contract for all these things around the world? Do we have to drive all the taxis? Do we have to own all the restaurants? Do we have to be all the waiters around the world? No. We once,
Subhanallah.
we once led the world intellectually. For over 1,000 years, we were the intellectual giants of the world.
Absolutely.
We
mashallah.
gave the West what they know of Greek philosophy. The West got to know Aristotle through Arabic translations and Arabic commentaries written by Muslim scholars in Spain. And some of them were non-Muslims who wrote in the Arabic language, such as the Jewish scholars,
Maimonides, yeah.
as well as some Christian scholars. Yeah, Maimonides, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah,
Yes,
subhanallah.
absolutely. So we are a people of justice. So when you mention people like Patricia Crone and Douglas Murray,
They're not
they
the
will
same.
always be known as bigots. They will never have any respect in academic circles. They will never be accepted as scholars, true scholars. I mean, Patricia Crone, to be fair,
Yeah, she's better.
is
That's
a
what I mean.
scholar.
She's not
She
the
was a
same
she was
as
scholarly.
Douglas Murray.
She was very learned. You cannot take that away from her. She was highly learned. Douglas Murray is not someone who deserves that honor because he's not learned in Islam. He's just a bigot who is a paid puppet to peddle hate against Islam and Muslims. He is following an agenda. He works with a think tank that is out, which is inherently Islamophobic. This is what they do. They are xenophobic. Not only xenophobic, they are specifically Islamophobic, right? So these people, their business is Islamophobia. Okay, I cannot say that about Patricia Crone.
No, she's very
but
different.
she had been thoroughly refuted by other academics, such as Sargent. There's an article written by Sargent on Patricia Crone's approach to the theory she had on Mecca, for example.
Hager is, yeah.
Okay, there are other Western academics who do not agree with her. People like Hugh Kennedy, who happened to
Yes.
be my supervisor.
Donner as
for
well,
my
to some
master's.
extent, disagreed. Fred Donner.
Fred Donner disagrees. Then we have Robert Hoyland, who is not one of these, revisionists as such. Some people, they have to be historically correct. You see, they have to be careful about their career as well. So they can't say things openly about Islam that will go against the revisionist theory outrightly.
Yeah.
So they have to be very careful. They have to be diplomatic with their language. They have to be very academic, so to say. So they have to be careful.
When
there are
sorry.
revisionist scholars, no doubt, but they are on the back foot now. They have been
Yes.
rejected recently. Recent scholarship is very much in favor of the traditional view on Islamic history, because a lot of the traditional traditional literature is being confirmed by material evidence, such as what we have found
Manuscripts.
recently
Yeah.
in epigraphic records around Mecca. There are inscriptions on rocks. This is new evidence surfacing, and a lot of scholars are studying it. Numismatic evidence has been added. Then there are inscriptions, there are monuments, there are manuscripts. So a lot of this, there is papyri evidence, for example. There is a scholar. She teaches at Oxford University. Her name is Fanny Bassard. She has done some good work recently on papyri to basically confirm that the advent of Islam for the Middle East and beyond was actually a source of prosperity. Some of these revisionist scholars were of the view that Islam brought suffering with it. This was a very hostile, almost an Islamophobic view among some scholars. Some of them happen to be from Israel for understandable reasons. Okay, and they were peddling this view, but other scholars have completely refuted it in the light of evidence they have found. And they claim that Islam, actually the advent of Islam was a source of prosperity for a lot of these lands, and they have used specific examples to make their points. So people like Douglas Murray and Majid Nawaz and Tariq Fatah and Irshad Manji and Ayaan Hirsi Ali, these guys are paid puppets to throw dirt at Islam. And this is why we need more intellectuals who are involved in media. We need more journalists. We need more authors. We need more intellectuals. We need to really, raise the pressure. We need to raise the bar when it comes to more Muslim representation on Western media. Unfortunately, the people who have been representing us are barely capable to represent Islam, Muslim civilization, and Muslim culture at large. So Western masses, unfortunately, are largely very ignorant of Islam. And not only that, what they do know is very negative,
twisted,
because
sometimes.
most people they are listening to are enemies of Islam.
Absolutely.
Okay, they are Islamophobes. They are outright Islamophobes.
It's interesting because with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, it's crazy how much reach they're getting now. Because I was literally listening to, because I like listening to business podcasts. I was listening to Tim Ferriss with Gary Vaynerchuk, and then he was talking. Tim Ferriss was talking about, I think he did a book asking questions to people that have succeeded in life, essentially. And then he was reading out the names of the people he interviewed, and then he mentions Ayaan Hirsi Ali. I'm like, how did she get onto like a business podcast and be championed as like someone that's revolutionized, I guess, society to some degree? Because she was exposed as a liar. Like if you look at the videos and the people that did the research, she's lied about her background and what happened, and even her family. I think there was some situation she accused her family member of doing something bad to her.
Even if she hasn't lied, man, like the conclusions, the way she smears the entire Muslim world with the same brush of the people in her proximity.
It doesn't matter what her past is. It doesn't matter whether she lied about the past or not. What really matters is what she's doing now and what she has been doing in the past, in recent past. For example, when she wrote this book, she has somehow become an expert on Islam for some reason, unfortunately, right? She's being paraded around the world to somehow highlight the Muslim, the barbarity of Islamic cultures. Basically, she is, for some reason, her personal experiences, whether true or false, we don't know whether she's telling the truth about her personal experiences. Her personal experiences, for some reason, have become how can I put it, the classic example of experiences Muslim women face around the world. This is the bigotry we're facing. This is the level of bigotry, or this is the level of injustice we are facing on Western media, unfortunately, because these people are being paraded around as if they represent. Even Malala is another case. Malala Yousafzai from Pakistan. I wish her the best. I believe she's a child and she's being used for some very agenda-driven, ends. And she's not fully aware. I believe she's not fully aware of, her significance when it comes to propaganda against Muslim cultures.
So why is she being championed? Why is she being criticized? I know, like, she's being criticized
in the Muslim community.
Could you elaborate, like, why? Because people see her as just she's promoting education for women and this and that, and she made it out from a disastrous situation.
I think the kind of and perhaps Ustad can clear this up. It's about the propagation of the dichotomy between Islam and progress to some extent. Is that what we're kind of getting at with?
Absolutely. So indirectly, what is being shown here is that, look at this poor girl. She's from a Muslim country. She was shot because she was promoting education for girls. We picked her up. We brought her to the civilized West, and now we are sending her to Oxford University. She's shaking hands with some of the major leaders of the Western world. She delivered a speech at the Canadian Parliament. I don't know what the equivalent of the Parliament in Canada is, but she delivered a speech in front of Justin Trudeau, and she met Trump. She met and look at this girl, and we are against such oppression. But so are the Muslims. This is what the world is not realizing. By parading her around the world like this, the impression that's being given is that the Muslim world is absolutely barbaric. There is no value for such people in the Muslim world, and people like Malala are suffering in the Muslim world, which is far from truth. Okay, if you go to Qatar, if you go to Dubai, if you go to Malaysia, okay, if you go to places like Pakistan, where Muslim women are very prominent in politics, in academia, some of the best journalists in places like Pakistan are women. Okay, so all of this is not shown to the world. Unfortunately, all the people in Canada, they don't watch Pakistani news channels. They don't know what women scholars are doing in Pakistan, or what women scholars there are in Malaysia, or how educated women are in places like Qatar or Dubai, or even Jordan, for example, or Egypt, for that matter. So the Western masses are not being shown this side. They are only shown this poor girl who was shot for promoting education, hence the barbarity of Muslim culture.
And the way it's framed is often that she was shot by Islam itself. Like, even though there is no obvious, we know that can't be the case.
And we, to be honest with you, we have no idea who shot her. Although the blame is put against some extremist elements in Pakistan, I wouldn't be surprised if they did it. Because this is why they're extremists. This is why they're extremists, right? Islam specifically stands out as a faith, as an ideology that promotes education of women in particular, to an extent that never before in the history of humanity so many women were educated by any other civilization. Let me repeat that so it's clear. Never before in the history of humanity so many women in such large numbers were ever educated by any other civilization than Islam. Okay, the Muslim civilization for over 1,000 years facilitated education for women in particular. Okay, there is a book actually written by Asma Saeed. She's an American academic. She has written a book on the education of women in medieval Islam, basically. So she talks about early Islamic period when a lot of women were Hadith scholars. They were educated by Hadith scholars, and they became authorities in Hadith in the first 3 centuries, and then later on, the Ottomans pioneered it, and even during the Ayyubid period, there are some examples. So there's a lot to cherish in our history which is being neglected, and the only reason we fall for these traps and these propaganda campaigns is because we are not aware of our history. We don't understand our civilization. We are not aware of the evidence.
That's why all these points need to be highlighted. With the idea of, like, I know we're talking about women's achievements in Islam and Muslim countries, and there's women in politics and academia and all that, and I obviously agree, but I think this is an interesting kind of discussion point where we can talk about, like, people don't, like, some honest people that want to study societies just in general of how the Muslim society is compared to what the West is. And for the most part, and I would actually ascribe to this to a certain degree, because I'm from a Bangladeshi background. Like, if you go to Bangladesh, what happens is that men are so dominant in society, so it's a bit harder for women to find those right channels in order to succeed. It's more of a sort of perhaps an outlier case, or perhaps it's a bit more harder compared to women in the West as well. So when we have these conversations, like we were talking about Malala and how she's peddling this idea, this is the state of
and it's not her fault. I mean, just to clarify, it's not Malala's fault. I don't blame her for this.
I understand that.
I actually blame her father more than anyone else, because he seems to be an opportunist who is using his daughter for whatever ends he has in his mind. So I don't blame the girl. She's still a child. She's studying, and she's living a good life, which she deserves. She suffered. There's no doubt she suffered. But her suffering is being manipulated and is being used for the wrong reasons to tarnish a great civilization, and this is what we need to highlight.
I agree with that. I was more referring to perhaps studying society in Muslim world, maybe perhaps in the subcontinent in Bangladesh. Like I can only speak for Bangladesh compared to perhaps in the West, that people that are maybe non-Muslim but are sincere, they'll agree that what we're talking about with Malala and stuff. But when they try to analyze perhaps Bangladesh, they don't want to come off as Islamophobic, but then they may make observations saying that it's a bit harder for women to kind of progress within society because males are so dominated compared to the West. So isn't that a kind of valid criticism?
Bear in mind, though, that Bangladesh, two of the most powerful people in Bangladesh for the last 3 decades have been women. Khaleda
Course,
Jia
I understand.
and Sheikh
I understand.
Hasina.
No, but that's my. I'm saying
Yeah,
that
yeah.
there will be cases. I'm not denying that.
Of course.
But I'm saying for the most part, like I've been in Bangladesh. It's all the society is dominated by
of
male.
course. But compare that to the United States or Australia. Like we had a female prime minister for 2 years, and every day you open the newspaper, there was something sexist written about them.
Yeah, I'm not.
And Hillary Clinton, obviously the United States wasn't ready for.
I believe main reason for this decline of women's education in lands like Bangladesh, Pakistan, India. India is also part of it. By the way, India is no different. In fact, literacy rate in India is possibly far less than what we have in Bangladesh and Pakistan. Partly because India is larger as a country. Okay, so India is a non-Muslim country, predominantly speaking, and it has the same problem. I'm pretty sure Burma is going through the same issue, and other so-called third world countries. Africa, okay, Africa is not, sub-Saharan Africa is not a Muslim. So the reasons are more economic than cultural or religious. Okay, it is because of corruption in these lands. Money never makes it to institutions. Okay, money is before it reaches these institutions, money is snatched by predators, vultures, scavengers, who are very often governing on the highest posts. They're serving the highest, positions in these lands, and that's why education is a problem, not only for women, also for men. For example, in Pakistan, unfortunately, corruption completely devastated the country. Schools are not even functioning properly in Pakistan. So before we start talking about gender issues, we need to start thinking of rebuilding our institutions. Once these institutions are working properly and they are funded as they should be funded, then we can start thinking of having some balance when it comes to gender equality. Okay,
I definitely agree with it.
This is a valid criticism of our lands, no doubt, 100%. There are problems there, but these problems are not caused by the religion of Islam. In fact, when we were following our religion, when we did follow our principles, so to say, we prospered. And the best period in our history when it comes to education of women in particular was when Islam was dominant as an intellectual power in the world. And that dominance, of course, came from political power, and that political power came from economic strength. So economically, Muslims were very powerful in the past. Okay, they controlled the flow of silver and gold. They controlled major economies around the world. They controlled the Mediterranean Sea when it came to trading. And for this reason, there was plenty of money to invest in institutions, and women and men were being educated. Now, economically, we are in a decline in these so-called third world countries. It's not only a Muslim problem, it is a global problem. If you go to South America, for example, if you go to countries like Bolivia, Ecuador, or even Brazil, okay, if you go to Honduras, you might find similar problems. Okay, so it has something to do with how economies work and how corruption can be controlled in these lands, in these countries.
The issue I had with not the issue I had with the point you made, Tanzim, but the point I was trying to make was not that I didn't fundamentally understand that people can make and level these criticisms about oppressive patriarchy in that happen to be in Muslim countries. It's that I don't think that the West is necessarily a great deal less sexist. I think sexism manifests in different ways. I mean, growing up in the eastern suburbs, for example, I saw that women were obviously educated the same as men. In fact, the girls' school next to the boys' school that I went to actually did better. So obviously, in a very sort of realistic light, men and women had equal education.
Girls generally do better. They do better than boys.
Yeah,
they were like, the thing is the kind of language that I heard my peers, and even at times perhaps I myself fell into, was one of objectifying women to the point where they literally had no agency except for their physical appearance or something or things like this. And it's something that we overlook a lot. It was that I identified that, yes, there were issues in the Muslim communities and in ethnic communities and in migrant communities in Australia to do with sexism. But it wasn't that they were any more sexist. It was just that sexism manifested in a very different way to how it manifested in the sort of liberal and open society.
I agree, but I'm saying I'm talking about more structures in place that allow pathways for women to, I guess, excel in, and I feel that it's a lot more tougher in Bangladesh. But but I wanted to ask, like, I agree with the idea, you know, it's economic and there's structures in place, and that's what we have to focus on. That then they'll allow for, you know, women to, you know, flourish within society. And we can also argue that, you know, it threads back to kind of, it's like sprung out from colonialism and the after effects of that. And that's why we're in this state, because we only have the structures that were given after kind of colonialism. And due to, you know, capitalism in this day and age, it sort of halts us in a way of proper progression, because we're kind of stuck as all the resources are drained from those countries. But so we can always tie it back to, I guess, some sort of colonialism in a sense. But I wanted to ask Ustad, because I noticed this in a lot of your talks, and you did it as well, that you mentioned you know, extremism and all that, and it's about condemning it. And I've noticed that you do that in your talk as well. I wanted to ask, though, this is just my opinion, wouldn't you say that it's a better tactic? And I know you have, by the way. I know you've criticized, you know, the West and what they do and all that sort of stuff. But wouldn't you say, like, to rather not just condemn extremism, it's better to just focus on the core problem, which is perhaps, you know, you mentioned yourself that, you know, extremism is bred from quote unquote extremism is a reaction to what the West are doing. So isn't it better to just focus on perhaps what the West are doing and put your energy to that, rather than us being on the back foot and saying, you know, we have to condemn extremism with the community? Because that kind of may apply that there's something inherent within Islam that may get out of hand that, you know, causes extremism, if that makes sense. So that was just my sort of question.
I agree with you somewhat, but at the same time, I have a different approach. What I do is I believe in acknowledging faults where they exist. For example, if there are faults in our communities, in our people, for example, we acknowledge it, and then at the same time, we highlight the elephant in the room. Okay, we should never fail to highlight the elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is, of course, the causes we have already discussed, a few minutes ago, right? We talked about the causes of terrorism, global terrorism. It never existed in, let's say, in the 80s. Not to this extent, not to the extent we are facing now in the world today, right? What happened? What went wrong? Why did people become so extreme that they have to resort to such barbaric and uncivilized ways to get back to their enemies, or even to get their voices heard, right? So we have to look at the causes more carefully. So we do acknowledge extremism where it exists. Because if we don't acknowledge it, what happens is our enemies, people who are trying to tarnish our name, people who are trying to tarnish our faith and our civilization, they use that as some kind of insinuation that we are in a tacit kind of agreement with what's happening in the Middle East. No, we're not. We make that very clear that we are civilized humans, and Islam made us civilized. Our civilization is purely Islamic. It is the Quran we refer back to. The Quran is our source to show us what is extreme and what is not. The Quran has categorically given us rules of engagement, even in conflict. When we look at Surah Baqarah, verses 190, 191, 192, right? The Quran is very categorical what is extreme and what is not. So we should be proud, to use the word again in the right sense, of our civilization, our faith, our sources, right? The Quran and the Sunnah is the reason why we condemn extremists in our midst. At the same time, it is the Quran and the Sunnah that guides us to highlight the elephant in the room wherever it may be, whatever situation we may be facing, in whatever period, in whatever time, in whatever, place. So if there is a problem, If there's a larger problem we need to highlight, like Western foreign policies in the Middle East and propaganda on predominantly Western news channels like CNN, Fox News, NBC. These channels have been pumping a lot of Islamophobia and xenophobia in the last decade. We need to highlight these problems. Okay, deliberately making the masses ignorant of the true nature of the culture of Islam or even the Muslim peoples in general, right? So I believe the approach has to be fair. It has to be just. We acknowledge the problems where they exist. At the same time, we highlight the elephant in the room. So we do both at the same time. This is what my approach is.
But the only thing I would say is that, like, for example, you live in the UK, I live in Australia, Sydney. Let's just say a white European in society that who is non-Muslim, obviously, they're not going to actively always be like, "Hey, I condemn Western foreign policy." Like if you take an example for us, we're actually doing that. Like we're saying, you know, we condemn terrorism. So for them, it's not like they're going out of their way to be like, "Oh, okay, I condemn this." So wouldn't you say that like, because they do that, they don't do that, we need to emphasize the point more that is due to your actions and the global sort of reach and power you do have, because that seems to be lost. So like if I say like I condemn extremism, what you're actually doing, like for example, like for me, I'd be like, Muslims need to unite under Khilafah, for example, for in that sense. But then if a non-Muslim hears what I'm saying, they'll think ISIS straight away because of their preconceived notions. But obviously, I don't ascribe to ISIS and what they do. But it's a different history, because if you obviously yourself, and we would all know that if you research history, we know that Muslims had empires and Khilafahs and all that. But then if we kind of blur the lines, if they're using the same terminology on us as we do, like for example ISIS, and when we first say, okay, I condemn extremism, but then they'll be like, okay, cool, and then you say afterwards, but I want the Muslim world to unite, they'll be like, what's going on? This is ISIS. So you have to kind of play into different scenarios. So what you're actually doing is that you're playing into what I guess the non-Muslim European white man sort of wants you to think. So my kind of approach, what I was kind of alluding to, is that it wouldn't be better to just focus on the way that perhaps the wider society is meant to be perceived as by the non-Muslim white man, and we need to break that and then make the focal point on talking about what the West do specifically, because that's not even something they are willing to acknowledge. Like it's not like white European non-Muslims are going to go out and condemn some white supremacists that shot up a school shooting. It's always a Muslim that has to, if a Muslim does something, it's always a Muslim community on the back foot.
They do condemn it though, to be honest. And I mean, you got to bear in mind that Europeans have,
but to the extent that we have to do it, because we're expected to, as a minority.
Not so much, man. I my family are European non-Muslims, and I'd say that 90% of them understand perfectly well that terrorism is a response to foreign policy.
I'm not denying that, but I'm saying that we Muslim community are put on a unrealistic standard in order to paint that picture compared to
straight out. But you also have to bear in mind the other side of the coin is within the Muslim communities. In the meantime, people are still losing their lives for dumb ideas and narratives pushed by these extreme organizations, extremist movements and organizations.
Someone would argue that that's only like very isolated cases, and it's.
I don't think it is that isolated, man. To be honest, in my experience, there are a lot of young Muslim guys in our age, a bit younger even, who are basically throwing away their lives subscribing to these extremist ideologies and movements that are corruptions and distortions of the Quran and Sunnah. And if you're not talking about the fact that these are corruptions and distortions of the Quran and Sunnah, and you're not strong and robust in your condemnation of these, not just your condemnation, but your explanation of why this is batil, and this is actually, deeply problematic, then you're going to have young people. You might even save one or two people.
But if we make that kind of our focus point, then what happens is that this what the governments are doing, there's the CV programs and all that. They'll use those examples to be like, no, we need to monitor.
You never make it your focus point, bro. You never make it your focus point.
And that's like the main issue.
It can't be the focus point. You're right, but that doesn't mean that it can't be It can't be a fundamental aspect in your discussion. And like Ustad Adnan said, having that twofold approach, you can't make it the focus. No one's out. I'm not arguing. I mean, there are people who are advocating
in regards to having like people extremists,
having a focus on extremist groups and tendencies. I'm saying that we have to focus on the root causes of terrorism and the root causes of violence. That being, in more often than not, imperialism and aggression against Muslim countries.
What I'm saying is that, people within the community, like right-wing think tanks, they'll make it as there's something inherent within Islam. And not only that, like if you make the focus point about, Muslims that have, like, I don't know, quote unquote, gone rogue, and a lot of them, I don't know, like there've been cases where they're not even really practicing in the first place. They kind of latch onto it for different reasons, like, I don't know, belonging and whatnot. But if you make that your focus point, what happens is that kind of opens the gateways for CVE programs. So the government will be like, okay, there's something we need to monitor the Muslim community for these sort of individual cases, and that puts the whole community kind of at risk, right?
Yeah, well, they should monitor their own foreign policy first.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is shouldn't, rather than condemning extremism, shouldn't it be the focus is on the bigger picture, which is, always condemning foreign policy and going out there, not making a focus on, our own community, even though behind the scenes we'll take care of our community, right? But that kind of plays into
the
sort
debate
of
a
moderate Muslim and a radical Muslim, and when these terms are being used, it sort of creates problems.
Yeah,
right?
Obviously I reject that spectrum, although my point is that the two aren't mutually exclusive. Some would say they are mutually exclusive. In my experience, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. I think that there can be work done to refute batil, complete and agreed upon batil in the community. Think about it, man. If you had any other thing in Islam that people were doing that was a widespread issue, it's not necessarily an abundant issue, but a widespread enough issue that occurs in enough communities as the desire to join murderous and bloodthirsty groups.
You see, my response to this problem is basically that we need to have a multifaceted approach. We need to work on all possible levels. For example, there need to be a political response, like there has been recently from Imran Khan at the UN. He made a speech and he highlighted this issue, how the Prophet of Islam is being tarnished and no one bats an eyelid, and how Islamophobia is deliberately pumped through the Western media and no one cares, how Muslims are being brutalized around the world, although he failed to mention the case of the Uyghur people in China for political reasons, understandably so, because Pakistan depends on China for economic investments. But he raised all these points, and Tayyip Erdogan has been recently highlighting all these issues that just to use, for example, he confronted the German Chancellor Merkel on this issue, that you cannot say Islamic extremism because now you are insinuating that Islam is somehow linked to extremism. You cannot say that. Extremism is extremism. And you can't just say Islamic extremism conveniently and get away with it. It's not going to be acceptable anymore. So when we have global leaders speaking this language, it is very important to have that sort of political representation on that level. Then we need journalists. Then we need academics. Then we need activists. Then we need street du'at, for example. Okay. Then we need. I'm saying all levels. The Muslims need to wake up and they need to start, they need to start putting the record straight. Basically, we need to start speaking this language. That hold on a second, enough is enough. You've had, you've had your time for the last 2 decades since 9/11. Western media seems to have been given impunity, basically, to tarnish Islam and Muslims all around the world. Sometimes directly, other times indirectly, in a very subtle way. So we need to fix this. We need to fix this. We need to fix the language. And this starts on all levels. I believe you can't just have, this on one level, on the mosque level, or let's say on the university level. This needs to go all the way up to the top as far as presidents and prime ministers of countries are concerned. And it needs to go down to the level of the man who's selling fruit in the marketplace. We all need to be educated on this. We need education. Education is our problem. And this is why we need investment in education. We need to be more aware of the situation. Fortunately, and another problem we have is that in the Muslim world, a lot of people are not even aware of Islamophobia. They don't know that it exists because they've never faced it, because they live in Muslim majority countries. They never have to face propaganda against Islam. They don't have to hear insults against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, this is mainly happening in non-Muslim lands, in particular Western countries, right? So that's why we need solid political representation, and we need to lobby our leaders in the Muslim lands and talk to them about this, and then they will take action. So recently, I believe this summit in Malaysia was a breeze of fresh air. I believe that was a good step, although even from the start, it looked divided. The House was divided because many countries did not attend, including Pakistan, which is a nuclear power, unfortunately. But at the same time, it was a good step in the right direction. So we need a multifaceted approach. And then it will start to happen when Western masses hear our leaders talking like that in the UN, and when our journalists, our political representatives, our politicians in places like Britain, America, Australia, when we have proper Muslim representation in US Congress, we have Muslim representation in, although I don't agree with everything our Somali sister, I forgot her name, in the US.
Ilhan Omar, yeah.
Sorry?
Ilhan Omar?
Yes,
Yeah.
Ilhan. I believe she's doing a lot of good work. She's confronting a lot of xenophobia, a lot of Islamophobia. At the same time, she's doing a lot of controversial things, which I don't agree with. I clearly don't agree with a lot of unorthodox stuff she's doing. But she's not living in 9th century Baghdad, is she? She's not she's not living with Ibn al-Hazm in the 11th century Qurtuba, right? She is living in the US. She's facing a very hostile situation at times. As a Muslim woman, as a hijabi Muslim woman, standing up to some of these xenophobic monsters, it's not easy.
No, absolutely not.
We really need to make dua for her that she doesn't go too far in compromising some of her principles and stand up for the deen or stand up for the Muslim world, and highlight these problems. So again, to highlight, the main issue, we need to have a multifaceted approach. It has to be across the board.
And I think going back now to sort of how this is all interconnected very, very deeply, but you mentioned a lot about Muslims being aware and awake as to the realities of Muslim civilization. Now, I want to preface this question to you with something that I realized recently myself personally, and it actually links very much to the point you were making before. I used to be very skeptical of the idea of an Islamic civilization. In fact, if some people asked me, I would have rejected that such a phenomenon existed. I would have said that, Islam is very diverse, and you can't necessarily say that there is a united ummah as we all dream of it. But I traveled to Morocco recently, alhamdulillah. It was an amazing experience, and being welcomed there by people who don't speak my language, as a European Australian Muslim welcomed as a brother by people
White
who
privilege.
are completely on the other side of the world. No, but my wife is a Bangladeshi Australian.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's exactly the same. People would ask you, and they'd be like, "Oh, mashallah, you're Muslim. Assalamu alaikum, welcome, ahlan wa sahlan, enjoy." Like they'd give us things, and they would genuinely be so pleased and warm, and very, very welcoming, and very, very, very pleased with the fact that you were their Muslim brother. And that's something that you would never get in Christendom. Obviously growing up in a secular Christian family, I could go to Rome or I could go to Poland. No one ever would be like, "Oh, you're Catholic. Oh, welcome." No one cares. Islam has a very distinct flavor in that sense. And the other thing I realized as well was reading a bit about Allama Iqbal. I noticed like how does a Southern Italian Australian draw so much inspiration from a man writing poetry in Hindustan 100 years ago. That's something unique and something special, and something which for me really speaks to the idea that there is a Muslim civilization. But I want to ask you about this Muslim civilization. And now that I do, obviously, I'm far more receptive to its existence. I want to ask you, Ustad, is there a point in time, because we all know the Khilafah went into a very, very famous demise. Is there a point in time where you think we fell off the rails a little bit? Is there a point in time where you think that perhaps the glory and wonder and the genius of the collective Muslim effort began to fade a little bit into the backdrop? And why and how did this take place?
Just right after Rasulullah's death and the four Khulafa, you're talking about like after that period? Like
I'm saying that if at any point in time, because he was talking about how we've lost this collective imagination and understanding and unity and level of zeal and genius.
Okay.
What was the cause of that? And
let me begin with your experience of the Muslim civilization when you went to Morocco. Christendom is not Christian anymore. This is what you have to understand. Okay, what you call Christendom, Western Europe has predominantly abandoned Christianity. Christianity now is a very absent force in Europe. It only exists in monuments, in cathedrals, some magnificent pieces of architecture, and that's all that is left of Christianity. So Christianity is on the back foot in Western Europe. Okay, I wouldn't say that for places like Poland or even Italy. I mean, somewhat, there are some denominations that are still flourishing. In the US, I would say yes, there is an element, a religious element, no doubt. Okay, but predominantly speaking, Christendom is is only in name. It doesn't exist anymore. Islam is a living civilization to this day. Okay, although the best part, the classical period, the golden age is over for a number of reasons, but the civilization still lives on in the people. Okay, as disorganized, as scattered, as disoriented as we may be, but we are still one block. We feel the same. Okay, as you can see, the pain of the Muslims of China is felt all over the world. The pain of the Muslims of Rohingya crisis is felt all over the world. Now, what's happening in India? There are Muslims speaking about it all over the world. There are Muslims in the US. So this ummah will always remain an ummah, no matter what others may think. But that ummah aspect or that ummah element will never part from this civilization. Alhamdulillah, it's still a living civilization, and Quran is the guarantee. So long as the Quran exists, the Muslim civilization will always last. So long as the Quran exists. Coming back to your issue of the decline, or was there a perfect time in the Muslim history when Muslims governed perfectly? If that's what your question was, I don't think that was the case ever. Immediately after the Prophet ﷺ, after the time of the Khulafa al-Rashidin, in fact, even during the time of the Khulafa al-Rashidin, human imperfection was manifest. The system is perfect, okay, but humans are not. Humans are vulnerable to a number of temptations, a number of distractions, okay. We are susceptible to faults, to errors, to misjudgments, and this was seen immediately after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. And in fact, the Prophet had warned that this will happen after me. Okay, do not become disbelievers and strike each other's necks after I die. This is what the Prophet ﷺ said. Okay, he emphasized so much on the rights of the Muslims in Hajjatul Wada. Why do you think that he was doing that? Because he was warned. In fact, there are prophecies the Prophet ﷺ made about Uthman bin Affan's death, that you will be asked to take off the cloak. And when you are asked to take off your cloak, do not do so. And that cloak was the cloak of Khilafah, which was put on him by the Prophet ﷺ by the virtue of this hadith, right? So when Uthman was asked to abandon his claim to being the caliph of the Muslims, he refused because he remembered the hadith. Likewise, the Prophet ﷺ made other prophecies, the fitna that came in the time of Ali bin Abi Talib. So we go on to the Umayyad period. It was not perfect. The Abbasid period, it was not perfect. Then if you want to talk about the Ottomans, the Mughals, okay, the Ayyubids or the Seljuks or all the other minor dynasties throughout the Muslim history, wherever they may be. There was no such thing as a perfect government ever in Muslim history. Okay, no doubt there were periods of high achievement, there were periods of high morality, there were periods of high levels of education and economic prosperity, but it was never consistent. So Muslims struggled to implement Islam and practice it to the best of their abilities. So when people talk about a perfect state, a utopia, okay, somewhere where everyone is basically living happily ever after, okay, fairyland world, or my Little Pony land, it never existed. It never existed in Muslim history, and this is how it was meant to be. Islam was sent down as a perfect system to be implemented by imperfect creation of Allah, which is the humans, basically, right? So you will never have a perfect state ever, anywhere. We can say the Prophet's time in Medina was highly prosperous in that sense, but again, there were problems there. Prophet ﷺ was not allowed to govern in peace. He was in conflict continuously. He was fighting his enemies continuously, non-stop, right? Even at the time of Abu Bakr, 2 years, he had chaotic 2 years. Umar bin Khattab was again focusing on the Byzantines and the Persians, and it continued like that. So it will always be a struggle to apply Islam fully. You will never find any example in Muslim history where Islam was perfectly, fully, completely practiced by one dynasty or one caliph. It doesn't exist. That's my theory. Okay, this is why I believe those perfectionists out there who eventually become takfiris and they start disowning people or excommunicating people from Islam for falling in error or not being able to govern by Sharia in totality, in completion, their view is very extreme. Actually, it's borderline Khawarij view, because the Khawarij, who were these people? The Khawarij were perfectionists. They were actually perfectionists. They had a very strict, very how can I put it, extreme level of piety, and they judged others by that level of that level of piety, that standard, to an extent that they disowned the Sahaba. They declared Ali to be a kafir. They declared Muawiyah to be a kafir. Anyone who didn't agree with them was a kafir, basically, effectively. So we have this phenomenon in this world today, unfortunately, within the Muslim communities. We have youngsters who become very zealous. They become perfectionists. They start to look for a perfect human being in other Muslims. They start to look for a perfect system, perfect country. If a ruler or if a country makes a mistake, immediately they take out their takfir guns and they start to shoot people down, unfortunately. So this is because of ignorance, because they are not aware of Muslim history. They don't know that never was there a perfect state or perfect government in the history of Islam. There was always a struggle to apply Islam to the best of their abilities.
How about with the struggle, we would see like perhaps certain downfalls at times. And by the way, shout out to Yaman in our Boys in the Cave Patreon chat. It's an exclusive chat where people can ask the questions directly and to be asked. So Yaman was asking that, for example, Dr. Shadi tweeted recently how Muslim leaders in Andalusia deserve to be conquered. So there's that dichotomy of, is it perhaps the mistakes of the rulers they made that caused that decline, or there's that sort of perspective within Islam is that at times the sins of the community or the people also play an effect of the political situation. So versus the masses for those sort of specific situations. So would you even see Islamic history as having any downfall at all? And if so, because you're kind of saying that, there was a struggle to apply Islam, which I understand.
I don't agree with this way of thinking. I believe one of the worst enemies of the Muslim civilization was this way of thinking that there has to be a perfect ruler who has to govern perfectly by the rules of Islam. And by using this particular way of thinking, people rebelled against states, people rebelled against rulers, and they went from bad to worse. It happened recently. You know what happened in the Arab Spring? They removed Mubarak, and then who came? Who replaced Mubarak? Morsi. Okay, and now people are praying to go back to the to the rule of Mubarak, because they're saying Mubarak's rule, as bad as it was a lot better than what we have today. Libya, for example, people are praying to go back to the time of Gaddafi, as bad as he was as a ruler. So this is what it does. I mean, no one deserves to be defeated or ousted in that sense. I'm not a person of status quo. I don't believe in status quo, but I believe in gradual change. I believe in political change. I believe change must be done through education. Rebellions must be avoided at all cost. Violence only leads to bigger disasters. What we have seen in Syria recently is a great example of that. Syria has been devastated. Was it worth it? The person who was to be ousted is still there, possibly stronger than before. Bashar al-Assad is still ruling. And who has lost? The people of Syria, unfortunately. Our sisters have been raped in their thousands. Children have lost their childhood in war. This trauma, this generation has been lost. You cannot imagine what the trauma of war is like. I've never witnessed it. I've never experienced it, but I can only imagine. Okay, and I can give you other examples. I'll give you one crude example. What happened in India? How do you think the East India Company came to power? There's a recent book you must read. It is by William Dalrymple, and it is titled Anarchy. Okay.
Shout out to Josh. He's a massive fan of Dalrymple.
Oh, Dalrymple is an amazing author. I mean, I don't agree with all the things he writes, but he's an amazing author. And I particularly don't agree with when he puts a review by Salman Rushdie on his books. It really ticks me off. I don't know why he needs to do that. Okay. But he's an amazing author. So we have to do justice, and we have to give credit where it's due. And his recent book, Anarchy, is a very good history of how East India Company came to power and how it devastated India, right? But how did it come to power? Because someone in Bengal thought the current Nawab, who was a bad man, no doubt, according to the sources I've read so far, Nawab Sirajuddaulah, who was the Nawab of Bengal in 1757, was a very unpopular ruler. He was a very bad ruler, made very bad choices. So what happened? His generals, his nobles started to plot against him. They wanted to remove him, to replace him with, let's say, someone like Mir Jafar, who was appointed as the next Nawab by Lord Clive, the man who fought the Battle of Plassey in 1757. So East India Company was invited to oust Nawab Sirajuddaulah, to plant another puppet Nawab, and lo and behold, this particular disaster caused eventually the conquest of all of India. You see what it does? So when you want to remove one bad ruler, what you do is you remove him, and what comes as a replacement is far worse in consequences than what you had there in the first place. So instead of causing drastic, how can I put it? Instead of taking drastic measures, instead of doing violence, instead of rebelling, there are other ways to do politics. And this is why I believe ulama, the scholars of the land. And who are the scholars of the land? The most recognized, the most respected individuals. I'm not talking about sellouts. I'm talking about true scholars, sincere scholars who are sincere with the ummah. They must be followed. They must be followed. They must be approached, and they must be, they must guide the masses. We should not become part of political movements, ragtag political movements that are reactionary and that only last 50 to 60 years. and then they are forgotten. We should not become part of. Rather, we should become.
Refuted HT.
I'm referring to any movement that leads to such
Swallow.
events, such catastrophes, that promotes rebellions, that promotes disturbance of the status quo, and then replacing bad with worse. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. I'm saying we must aim to become a part of the larger Muslim civilization rather than become a reactionary movement that ends up in a disaster. I mean, you will
Ustad, wouldn't you say-
only appreciate what I'm saying when you have a thorough look into the Muslim history and see what devastated some of the Muslim civilizations or some of the Muslim dynasties in the past.
Ustad, wouldn't you say like perhaps your examples that you're bringing to light is more stemmed from, I know the strong opinions of, Islamically, rebellions are not allowed. So wouldn't you say that you only bring examples for that because people who may be undergoing those unfortunate political situations in those lands, they like what sort of scope do they have for attaining justice then? Like what can they essentially do? I know you mentioned gradual changes, but what does that even entail?
Okay, is it justice to remove injustice to replace it with a bigger injustice? Is that justice? There is not an example in our history where a rebellion has actually benefited us. There is only one example I can think of, and that's the Abbasid Revolution. Okay, even the Abbasid Revolution initially was called a Khawarij movement, and then later on, because it managed to dominate the best part of the Muslim world, all the way from North Africa to Central Asia, and then it was as a pragmatic move accepted by the ulama as the valid governing force within the Muslim world. Okay, that's the only example I can think of. Okay, and even that led to disasters initially, right? Imagine what happened between the Ottomans and the Timurids. Amir Timur, Tamerlane, had defeated the Ottoman Emperor Bayezid Yildirim, and that nearly caused the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Because after the demise of the emperor, 3 of his sons fought each other for succession, right? So I believe all of these measures, these movements, having studied history for the best part of my life, my views have changed drastically. My views have changed. I have learned a lot. And I am, by the way, I'm not a quietist. I don't believe in status quo and suffering. But what I believe in is that when we want to change a bad situation, then we must follow the guidance of the ulama, the scholars of the land. And if they guide us into a particular way of removing injustice, then even then, I believe, even then, we have to assess the situation. Sometimes scholars can be wrong. They can make mistakes. So we have to be very, very careful. This is what has caused the Muslim civilization to flourish. This is what has caused the Muslim civilization to be a force for good, because we can never be part of devastation. We can never be part of destruction. We can never be part of injustice. We can never be those people who take sides with injustice. Rather, we must always struggle to remove injustice, but how we do it is another question, and that has to be decided by the ulama of the land. This is what we have been taught by the Prophet ﷺ. So I don't believe in these reactionary movements that lead to catastrophic events, and sometimes they don't know. I mean, for example, what was the slogan during the Arab Spring? Ash-Sha'b yurid isqat al-nizam. Ash-Sha'b yurid isqat al-nizam. But none of them was saying ma ba'd al-isqat. Ma ba'd al-isqat. What they were saying, we want the demolition of the system. We want to remove the system. Okay, but what do you bring to replace it? No one was talking about that. There was no guidance. Okay, what are you going to replace it with? No one was talking about that. Hence, the current situation in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, and I really wish that this doesn't happen in any other country again. I really wish.
It's catastrophic. I do want to sort of probe you a little bit more, just briefly.
I don't know if you guys agree with me, but this is the way I think. This is my thinking. This is the way. Yeah.
No. I think I'm personally, I'm not probably well enough equipped to dismantle what you're saying. I'm sure that there are notable thinkers in the Muslim community who would disagree with that view. I tend to sort of take a backward step and try and think critically about these things, and I think that there is a case to be made for the argument.
I'll tell you, this discussion is a very healthy discussion. We need to have more of these discussions so that our intellectuals, our thinkers, as different as they might be in their views, they are free to differ. They don't have to agree with each other. But once we start brainstorming in the light of our history, in the light of our theological guidance, then I think we will come to senses, inshallah, as an ummah.
I suppose the counter argument is by and large around the fact that we should always be striving to do what's best. And there are certain lines, there are certain lines that can be crossed by a tyrant ruler. For example, if that ruler is promoting something that's kufr, can you then remove them, or would you still say that's something that is different?
Is who defines what's best? Who defines? Is it Joe? Is it Tom? Is it Terry? Is it Abdullah? Is it Abdullah?
Rafael?
Is it Qasim? Okay. Who defines? It is the ulama of the land. The Quran commands us to follow them. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. The Quran says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم فإن تنازعتم في شيء فردوه إلى الله ورسول. Okay, follow Allah and His Messenger and those who are in power. And the ulama, the mufassirin have explained that ulul amri minkum here means the ulama, primarily your scholars. And I'm not talking about against sellouts, people who are working for the tyrants. I'm not talking about them. So put them out of the picture. I'm talking about people who are sincere. They cry for the ummah. They have pain for the ummah. They really feel for the ummah, right? So it is very, very clear that what is the right course of action in a given situation must be determined by the scholars who are best placed to guide the ummah. If there is a tyrant who is promoting kufr and is doing injustice, then in that case the ulama must be consulted and their guidance must be followed.
SubhanAllah. It is a very complex discussion, and like I said, there are Muslim thinkers and intellectuals within the community who have vastly different views. I remember we had Ismail Royer on a while ago, and he actually made the point that if you had a Islamist movement, for example, in Egypt, he said that the apparatus and the structures in Egypt and everything there kind of funnels towards an oppressive, tyrannical security state. And he said that basically the choice is between a secular security state and an Islamist security state, but it's still going to be a highly oppressive system, more likely than not. It's not all of a sudden going to become a flourishing, open, tolerant
Why can't
society.
we follow the Turkish model?
Well, that's it. I mean, they've tried many times in Turkey. To be fair, like Erdogan is not the first Muslim inclined.
We have Adnan Mandarin, and he was hanged for trying to Islamify Turkey. Yeah.
There was Erbakan as well,
before
and several
Erbakan,
other ones.
we had Adnan Mandarin. He was a Turkish prime minister who was hanged by the secular military establishment of Turkey.
They'll just run straight over the top of anyone who tries to. It was a long struggle,
but they never gave up. The Turks are very stubborn, mashallah, for the right reasons, and they have managed to somewhat Islamify Turkey, and it's still a long journey. To expect from Erdogan to become Sultan Suleiman al-Qanuni in 10 years, it's madness. Some of us are very unfair, very unjust.
Yeah, of course.
I'm not a spokesperson for Erdogan. He's not my hero necessarily. But I like his system, the way he's doing his politics. He's a strongly...
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot to be said about what he's done for Muslims in Turkey. I mean, a lot of his detractors, I would often ask them directly. And like I said, I don't necessarily agree with everything that he does.
No one does. No one agrees with everything
in a domestic policy level.
Yeah.
But But you can't deny. I honestly don't think you can deny the fact that all of his detractors in the. I say this as an Australian, obviously involved in our discussions in the West. I don't know about the Muslim world, but all of his detractors in the West that come from these kind of this kind of leaning towards revolutionary groups and Islamist politics. And again, I don't necessarily disagree with all of them, but one of the points they raise about Erdogan is that, you know, he could be doing so much more, and that he should be, you know, intervening against tyrants in Syria and Israel and for the Palestinian people. He has done quite a bit. But think about what he's done for the average Muslim in Turkey. Before he came in, a Muslim woman couldn't even wear her headscarf in many public institutions. She couldn't get certain jobs if she wore a headscarf. She couldn't wear it to school. You weren't allowed to talk openly about your faith in a country that's 97 or 98% Muslim. And he's turned the pendulum just towards something that at least acknowledges Allah and his messenger.
It's like Ustad,
in
that's
society.
like gradual. Like if we're trying too hard, too fast, it's going to be causing perhaps issues.
You'll
and
knock everything over.
Like Ustad, you mentioned like gradual change. Would you say that Erdogan is sort of playing into sort of the theory that you have that it's better to go through gradual change? And would this, and can you take this example into like how perhaps Ilhan Omar is doing even within her politics, like it's just gradual change, like slowly being involved with the system and perhaps, you know, changing, I don't know, making reforms and all that. Like, is this the sort of approach
lobby
that we
groups,
should,
yeah,
lobby
like
groups.
that,
Like,
yeah,
is this the sort of approach we should be heading forth? Like, should that be our main focus? And would you say Erdogan is sort of doing that gradual change that you were referring to earlier?
I believe that it is long lasting, it is more durable, it is far more effective. It doesn't cause disasters and catastrophes. It doesn't cause any suffering. You don't have starving people. You don't have dead people. You don't have refugee camps. You know, your people and education is the way. I believe work on education, invest in education. And when I say education, I don't mean any more engineers and doctors and lawyers and chartered accountants. I mean intellectuals, thinkers. Okay, invest in humanities. Produce more leaders. Produce more journalists, more authors, more researchers, for that matter. Okay, get involved in politics more. Okay, you will have a louder voice, not necessarily due to your vocal cords, but the amount of reach you will have. Okay, I mean, like Ilhan Omar is just a Somali lady from Somalia. Okay, why is she important? Because she is an elected congresswoman, right? She is important for that reason, and that's why she has to be taken seriously. So we just can't give up and start having idealistic ambitions that may not be realistic anytime soon. But we can do things far more effective that are in our power. So I believe we need to be pragmatic about our situation today in the world.
And would you say, however, like for example, we have the Hindutva situation in India and even the Uyghur Muslims, like they're already in such a Muslims in those you know, in China and India are in such a terrible state where they don't have that option at the current present moment to you know, have that power within politics or have the journalists. So what sort of would their approach be then in that sense?
This is what I talked about, the multifaceted approach. When we have presidents and prime ministers like Imran Khan, Tayyip Erdogan, and Mahathir Mohamad making statements, strong, powerful statement against such oppression and such barbarity, against, let's say, what the BJP government is doing in India, or what the Burmese government was doing against the Rohingya people, and what's happening in China against the Uyghurs, then there will be pressure exerted against these oppressors, and they will stop eventually, and the world will listen. But we have to speak up. We have to speak up. Okay, you know, we have no option other than to speak up. So our leaders, our intellectuals, our academics, our politicians, our journalists all need to make noise at the same time when something like this happens, and not making noise for the sake of making noise, rather making noise with substance, with evidence, with correct guidance, and give solutions. Not only highlight the problem, rather give solutions at the same time. And this is the solution we propose, so that we can avoid any such disasters in the future.
Inshallah. I know we've hit the towards the end of the episode, but I do want to ask one last question, inshallah. And we actually asked this question to all our guests, and I think this question is probably best suited to Ustad Adnan, considering he's a historian and researcher. So this might be either a very easy question, super easy question, or a very very hard question. So it's a one or the other. So here it goes, inshallah. So if you had to chill with 3 people in a cave, because boys in a cave, and you can't include Rasulullah Sallallahu or the Sahaba. Let's just assume they're already in the cave, and they're telling you to pick 3 people in history. It could be Muslim, non-Muslim. They could be past or present. To have a conversation with, who would they be?
I would have Ibn Taymiyyah and Shah Waliullah and my great-grandfather's grandfather, Sheikh Minhajuddin.
Tell us a little bit about him.
Sorry?
Tell us a little bit about Sheikh Minhajuddin.
He's my direct ancestor, my great-grandfather's grandfather. He was a scholar of Islam. I know about him from the literature that has been that I came across recently in our ancestral library, and he was a great man who struggled for independence against the British East India rule in India. He was actually part of the Indian War of Independence in 1857. He was put on trial as well. He had sought knowledge seriously. He was a scholar of Hadith. And rahmatullah alayhi, he died in 1895, if I'm not mistaken. And I would love to meet with him, and I would love to talk to him and ask him about his experiences and his life and how he went about things, And of course, I would love to have the company of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah and Shah Waliullah, great personalities, ajib personalities, I would say, in many ways, many respects. Of course, there are greater personalities than them. There are people like Imam Ahmad al-Hanbal, Imam al-Shafi'i, Imam Ghazali, for example. We have so many intellectuals. Wallahi, our history is absolutely filled with heroes and thinkers and intellectuals and poets and philosophers. We have just really ignored them. You were talking about Iqbal earlier. Iqbal, I would say, is a child in comparison to thinkers he was following. Iqbal was...
He would say that himself, yeah.
Yeah, Iqbal was inspired by people like Hafiz, Shirazi. He was also inspired by Rumi, although I don't agree with everything Rumi, put in his poetry. But he was a thinker, no doubt. You can't take that away from him. And he was inspired by Ghazali, for example. Iqbal was very much inspired by Shah Waliullah. So all of these people inspired Iqbal. Iqbal was a product of, again, the Muslim civilization of India and the Persianate civilization of the region. Let's say Persia, Afghanistan, and India put together. So we are standing on the shoulders of giants if we realize.
And what's I found amazing about Shah Waliullah is that even during his time, he's writing books on refutations on atheism, and that means that he was ahead of his time, subhanallah. And so that'd be amazing to sit down and have a conversation with him.
His political theory, if you want to read about his political theory, it is in 2 books primarily. One is Hujjatullah al-Baligha, which you can find it in the English language. It has been translated by Marcia K. Hersenman, and it is titled The Decisive Proof for God. His political theory can be found there. And also another book, Izalatul Khifa an Khilafatil Khulafa. It was originally penned in the Persian language, and now you can find an Arabic translation of it. Very, very powerful works. Very powerful author, Shah Waliullah rahmatullah Dahlawi.
Subhanallah. And we have actually had, this was a fantastic conversation, alhamdulillah, and we actually didn't even cover most of the dot points. There's so much to cover, but inshallah, I hope in the future we can perhaps do another episode. We can cover even more ground. I know, there's you've studied a lot about hadith and even Shia sort of theology as well, so it'd be really interesting.
Aspects, yeah.
So there's a lot to go into and a lot to discuss, but alhamdulillah, I think inshallah the viewers benefit from today's conversation. So jazakallah khair, Ustad, for coming on Boys in the Cave. Inshallah, I hope we can connect in the future, and may Allah bless your works, and inshallah, hope you do. Inshallah, may Allah bless your efforts for the PhD you're going to inshallah be doing.
Ameen.
Ameen.
And I would like to thank you both for providing me with this opportunity to express my views on such delicate matters. And I hope that these podcasts or these audio recordings and these programs will serve as a legacy for myself. I hope my children, my progeny will take benefit from these recordings maybe sometime in the future. I hope this becomes sadaqah jariyah for me, and other people are to benefit from this. And I beg for your forgiveness if I have said anything wrong, if I have made any mistakes, any errors. That was not my intention. I mean good for all of humanity, not only for Muslims. And I really hope that this world becomes a better place for our future generations. And you are very welcome to get in touch with me in the future, anytime, to talk about any matter that I can, I am able to talk about. Inshallah.
Inshallah.
You're very welcome to get in touch.
All right, fantastic.
Inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. And inshallah, yeah, that was a fascinating conversation. So we'll wrap it up there, inshallah. So for our listeners, thank you for giving us your attention. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email us at info@boysinthecave.com or find us on Facebook. And by the way, there was times we've actually started this Boys in the Cave WhatsApp thread for fans around the world. Literally, all you need to do is hop on Patreon. It's $5 per month. If you just donate there, you get onto the thread. And what happens is that even I notify the chat that we're actually doing a conversation with whoever's the guest, and they actually just shoot me questions. So we're actually having a good time there. We're actually discussing important issues. So inshallah, you don't want to miss out on that. So hop on patreon.com/boysinthecave and become a $5 patron. So check that out. And shout out to Yaman for assisting us with the question. He asked about the whole rulers and interactions, and that actually opened up a fantastic conversation for us, alhamdulillah. So also, if you want to check us out, we're on iTunes. Give us a 5-star there. So from our special guest, Ustad Adnan Rashid, co-host Rafael, and myself, we wish all the best. This is Tanzim signing off. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.